as you see here, I'm going to give you an overview about the descending tracts. If you watch my previous videos, I showed you one by one all those descending tracts. Now we will have a big revision about the descending tracts as a whole package. So if you look at this image, you can see a coronal section of the brain. Here is the right side of the brain. This is the right hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere. Within the brain, we have the basal nuclei and thalamus. And in the middle, we have the brain stem. Down here, you can find the spinal cord. Behind the brain stem, you can see the cerebellum. If you take a cross section through the spinal cord, you can see this butterfly-shaped gray matter at the center, which has two anterior projections called anterior horn or ventral horns, and two posterior projections called the posterior horns or dorsal horns. And then gray matter is surrounded by the white matter. So white matter has different columns: ventral column, dorsal column, and lateral column. Again, at the same, around the right side, we have ventral, dorsal, and lateral columns. So one of the most important descending tracts is corticospinal tract. So corticospinal tract, as its name suggests, it starts at the level of the cortex. So for the descending tracts, we have two motor neurons, upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. In terms of the corticospinal tract's upper motor neuron, the cell body is here. Imagine that this is the cell body of the upper motor neuron of the corticospinal, which is within the motor cortex, and then axons coming down, passing through the internal capsule, and then passing through the midbrain and crossing the pons and medulla. And at the caudal part of the medulla, most of the upper motor neuron axon crossing or decussating and going to the opposite side and running all the way down to get into the spinal cord. When they are getting into the spinal cord, they are landing here, the lateral white column, and then the upper motor neuron axon getting into the ventral horn and synapsing onto the cell body of the lower motor neuron, and the axon of the lower motor neuron exiting the spinal cord, passing through the ventral root to supply the muscles. So which muscles are supplied by the corticospinal? Actually, corticospinal tract is supplying the muscles of the distal end of upper limb and lower limb, because it's responsible for the voluntary, skillful movement of the upper limb and lower limb. The second tract, descending tract, is the Rubrospinal tract. So as you see here, Rubro means red nucleus, so it's the upper motor neuron cell body of the Rubrospinal is within the red nucleus of midbrain, and then the axon of the upper motor neuron decussating at the level of midbrain, and then it runs all the way down, passing through the pons and midbrain and landing again just next to the corticospinal tract into the lateral column. Again, the upper motor neuron axon coming into the this part, the ventral horn of the gray matter, synapsing into the cell body of the lower motor neuron, and axon coming out of the spinal cord and supplying the flexor muscles, mainly the upper limb flexor muscles. It's regulating or facilitating the upper limb flexor muscles. It seems that the Rubrospinal is little brother of the corticospinal because it's helping the corticospinal, and both of them are landing here in the lateral column. And the third tract, descending tract from this group, is reticulospinal tract. So we have the medullary reticulospinal tract. So reticulum means reticular formation. The upper motor neuron cell body of this tract is here into the reticular formation of the medulla. So imagine that it's here and the axon coming out without any decussation, it runs all the way down. And again, it's landing into the lateral column, and the axon of the upper motor neuron getting into the ventral horn, like those two tracts, they are synapsing onto the cell body of the lower motor neuron and supplying the flexor muscles. So medullary reticulospinal tract helping the rubrospinal tract to facilitate or regulate the flexor muscles of the upper limb and lower limb. So all these three tracts are working together. They are called the lateral set tracts or skilled tracts because they are responsible for the skilled movement of the upper limb and lower limb. And next group of the descending tract is vestibulospinal tract. Vestibular, the upper motor neuron cell body is here. The vestibular, this diamond-shaped vestibular nucleus of the brainstem, and the axon coming out without any decussation, it runs all the way down, getting into the spinal cord. Into the spinal cord, it lands here, the ventral column, and then like those three, the upper motor neuron getting into the ventral horn, synapsing onto the cell body of the lower motor neuron, and the lower motor neuron axon exiting the spinal cord and supplying muscles. Which muscles are supplied by this one? It's extensor muscles. So opposite to the rubrospinal and medullary reticulospinal, vestibulospinal supplying the extensor muscles. Which extensor muscles? Actually, it's supplying mainly the extensor muscles around the vertebral column, axial skeleton, and extensor muscles of the proximal part of the upper limb and lower limb to make the balance. So when you're losing your balance, your flexor muscles contract and collapse you and you fall down. So vestibulospinal tract supplying the extensor muscles of the upper limb, lower limb, proximal part, and axial skeleton to take your balance. Next muscle from this group, next tract from this group is pontine reticulospinal tract. So as I showed you, we have two reticulospinal tracts. One of them is medullary reticulospinal. The second one is pontine reticulospinal. So the upper motor neuron cell body is within the reticular formation of the the pons, and the axon coming out without any decussation, it runs all the way down and landing here next to the vestibulospinal tract into the ventral column. And then the axon coming out of the axon of the upper motor neuron getting into the ventral horn and synapsing onto the cell body of the upper motor neuron, the axon coming out and supplying the extensor muscles. So these two tracts are working together, supplying the extensor muscles to taking the balance. So they are very, very pretty. Very starts with V, vestibulospinal tract starts V, pretty starts with P, pontine reticulospinal starts with V. So very pretty. Vestibulospinal, pontine reticulospinal, both of them landing the ventral column tract, both of them supplying the extensor muscles to taking the balance. That's why these two tracts are classified as the medial set, because they are landing just medial to those tracts, and or basic tracts. This is the skilled tract or lateral set, basic tract or medial set. If you have any question, please put your questions into the comment and receive great feedback. Thank you.